Gelikang ikanvas, Dainik yakikanvas, Gelikang ikanvas, Tadroy.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for viewing our presentation. We're going to be talking about bilingualism in Ireland. So the history of the Irish language dates back all the way to the 4th century. The first written evidence ever found of the language was from commemorative stones known as this is known as primitive Irish, and it was a way of writing names using notches and strokes on the stones. The language then developed more into Old Irish throughout the 5th century when Christianity was establishing in these areas. This was known as the Golden Age of Irish. The language expanded into southern Scotland, St. Columbia, and Derry, and the Irish were gaining political, military, and economic power, and their language was spreading throughout the rest of Scotland. During this time is when the language got the name Gaelic. Gaelic is the Irish word for language. By the end of the 9th century, this language had spread over most of Scotland, northern Britain, and the Isle of Man. Viking invasions between the 8th and 10th centuries left lasting traces on the culture and language of the population, and many typically Scandinavian words are now found in modern Irish, in particular those relating to ships and navigation. When the Vikings were defeated at the Battle of Clontarf near Dublin in 1014, the Irish-speaking world of Ireland and Scotland seemed to be at the height of its political and cultural power, but this glory period did not last for a long time. In the 12th century, the Irish language saw new cultural and linguistic influence with the Anglo-Norman conquest of Ireland. Many of the new settlers spoke Norman French, and some spoke English. Because of their small numbers and good relations with the natives, they were quickly integrated into the Irish-speaking world. They also left their linguistic mark on Irish. Many modern Irish words originate from Norman French, especially words relating to legal and military matters and terms relating to architecture. Also, pronunciation and accents changed in those areas of Southern Ireland where the Normans were the strongest, something which still differentiates the dialects today. The English language they brought over was mainly confined in the city of Dublin and the suburbs around it.
The Gaelic aristocratic world was to collapse in 1601 when a last rally of Gaelic Ireland against the English conquest failed. Under English rule, many Irish chieftains and teachers were forced either to emigrate or go into hiding. And for many people, education continued only in the illegal hedge schools, in fields, barns, and sheds. From then on, dispossession, plantation, and new legal and economic systems ensured that the Irish language went into decline. The Irish language had no official status and was actively discouraged or suppressed. But Irish continued as the language of the greater part of the rural population and for a time of the working classes in towns. From the middle of the 18th century, as the penal laws were relaxed and a greater social and economic mobility became possible for the native Irish, the more prosperous members of the English-speaking community began to adopt an anglicized way of life and to take up English. From the 18th century on, the language lost ground in the east of the country. The reasons behind this shift were complex, but came down to a number of factors. Discouragement of its use by Anglo-British administrations, the Catholic Church supporting the use of English over Irish, the spread of bilingualism from the 1750s, resulting in language shift. This increased during and after the Great Famine in 1846 to 1848. Once it became apparent that immigration to the United States and Canada was likely for a large portion of the population, the importance of learning English became relevant. This allowed the new immigrants to get jobs in areas other than farming. It has been estimated that due to the immigration to the United States because of the famine, anywhere from a quarter to a third of the immigrants were Irish speakers. At the start of the 18th century, scholars started to become interested in the language and in its literature. Many people understood that spoken Irish was declining. Thomas Davis in 1843 was among those who publicly declared that Irish is a national language. The Society for the Preservation of the Irish Language, which was established in 1876, managed to gain recognition for Irish at every level of the education system, from primary school level to university. In the year 1893, many famous writers established the Gaelic League. Within a couple of years, they managed to create a mass movement of support for the Irish language. A start was made to bringing the grammar of the written language into line with the spoken modern language. At the end of the 19th century, they launched the Gaelic Revival in an attempt to encourage the learning and use of Irish, although few adult learners mastered the language. A result of these efforts was the official standard, which the Government of Ireland published in 1958. The Gaelic League became closely associated with Irish nationalism, and when, in 1922, the southern part of Ireland gained its independence from Britain, the new government adopted many of the League's policies as its own. Irish became the first official language of the state, and for many years it was a compulsory subject in schools. Despite independence, however, the numbers of native speakers continued to decline. In Northern Ireland, speakers of Irish were in a very different situation. The government saw Irish as a threat. Official policies were hostile to the language, with the result that Irish received no official recognition. Attempts were made to restrict Irish being taught in schools. Street names in Irish were banned, and Irish could not be used for any official business. Officially held negative attitudes to Irish and distrust of Irish speakers was maintained until the 1970s. Great Britain is still in control of Northern Ireland to this day, and the hostile environment still exists.
They just did Irish language in writing in school, and they learned very little about speaking the language. And it wasn't fashionable to speak Irish. You know, you were sort of looked down on. People tried to hide the language, but you wouldn't get a job either if you couldn't speak English. So historically, it was very difficult. So when I left school, that was the end of the language, even though I loved it at school. But the basic sort of undercurrent of shame hasn't disappeared totally. There's no facility for Irish by the government. They don't provide it for them.
In 2010, the Taoiseach, or Irish Prime Minister, began a 20-year initiative to increase English-Irish bilingualism from 2010 to 2030. Specific goals of the initiative include increasing the number of Irish speakers to 2 million, increasing daily speakers of Irish to 250,000, increasing the percentage of daily Irish speakers within the Gaeltacht, or Irish-speaking regions, to 25%, and making Irish an official language of the European Union. In 2012, the Gaeltacht Act was introduced. This act was intended to aid in the implementation of that 20-year strategy. It sets up 26 language planning areas and 16 Gaeltacht service towns in order to help with language planning. Once these areas have been announced, organizations can apply to the Hudaras na Gaeltachta, or Gaeltacht Authority, to become lead organizations for the act. Those chosen organizations will lead the language planning for their particular planning area, and once those organizations have been chosen, the Hudaras na Gaeltachta will help them make a language plan for increasing Irish language use in the community, homes, education system, and businesses. There will be a 2-year period for planning, after which the Department of Arts, Heritage, and the Gaeltacht will assess individual plans, and if they're approved, there will be a further 7 years for implementation, leading to full implementation by 2021.
Education in Ireland is done through several different mediums. The most prominent is through the government national schools. The official policy is that all students must take Irish in school, but there are many loopholes around that. Irish is taught for 30 to 40 minutes a day and focuses on vocabulary, grammar, and writing, with little to no emphasis on conversational skills. The teachers, who themselves are products of this broken language educational system, are forced to work with a curriculum that is solely in Irish, which they themselves have difficulty reading. Let's listen to a young man who began his education in a Gaeltacht school and then attended an English national secondary school.
I kept up speaking Irish, but only in my Irish class. One thing I was finding is, well, I had no opportunity to speak Irish anywhere other than in that Irish class. By chance, but I tried to lift it, but it was really good because if I hadn't found out about writing, I might wouldn't be able to speak Irish anymore. If there's not a lot of stuff happening outside of the classroom through Irish, it's just seen as the language you're speaking in the classroom, even if you go to a Wales school.
He brings up one of the aspects of language planning mentioned in our reading in the Baker book, in that for most people, there are few opportunities to use Irish outside the classroom. There has been little apparent status planning to elevate the status and use of Irish in the community. We've mentioned the Gaeltacht areas, as shown in dark green in the map, and another form of education in Ireland exists in the form of all Irish schools in these areas, which are now officially known as the language planning areas. In the past, some of these schools have been all Irish, but just as many were bilingual, structured very much like the dual immersion schools started by Dr. Giles, as well as the others we've visited here in Georgia. Similar to our dual language schools, the student population comes from a mix of homes in which Irish may or may not be spoken. A recent change in government policy, however, states that for a school to be designated as Gaeltacht, it must now teach all subjects in Irish. This new policy is a direct attempt to counter recent predictions of the impending death of the Irish language, and it is an excellent example of acquisition planning, as described by Baker. As you can see, however, the Gaeltacht areas constitute only a small percentage of the Emerald Isle. What revitalization efforts are being made throughout the rest of the country? In our Module 3 discussions, many of us noted the common theme in the readings that it's an essential element of language revitalization is that it can be ignited and sustained by an impassioned group of parents and citizens. The third form of education that we want to look at is the medium of all Irish schools in the non-Gaeltacht areas. An organization known as Gaelscoileanna is the primary umbrella under which the schools operate. Its self-reported goal is to establish and sustain a high standard of Irish medium education throughout the country, as well as to develop and strengthen the Irish-speaking community and culture. To this end, the schools support community events to bring families together to provide opportunities to speak Irish outside the classroom. The organization emphasizes the same benefits that we have studied and observed in our visits to our local bilingual and immersion schools.
It would outline such things as cultural advantages in that the aim of the immersion program would be to make them bicultural and to be aware of the two cultures involved.
Well, there are many advantages. The principal one being that they become very fluent and get a very good command of Irish, their second language. As well as that, they do so in a way that's at no cost to their first language. And indeed, it can be helpful to their first language because they have a greater awareness of language. It develops their thinking skills. There's a challenge in learning a new language that develops the brain in different ways. So it affects actually the hardwiring of the brain, as it's called. So they become more flexible thinkers, more creative thinkers.
In Ireland, the majority of citizens, roughly 76%, feel that multilingualism should be a political priority. However, most citizens find they have neither the time nor the energy to pursue another language. And foreign language education at the primary level has been deemed too expensive to pursue by the government. Moreover, only a third of employers emphasize multilingualism in their employees, making it even less desirable for citizens to put in the effort of acquiring another language, even though it may be culturally important. In the US, multilingualism is similarly not economically incentivized, although it is recognized that knowing multiple languages is useful. Furthermore, we also do not have multiple language classes offered in primary school. We also do not have any system in place for teaching Indigenous languages, even though there are far more of them in the US than in Ireland. Therefore, there are very few speakers of those Indigenous languages in the US.
So, what does all of this mean for the situation of Irish moving forward? Currently, English is still the dominant status majority language. These are statistics that were taken from the most recent Irish census in 2011. And as you can see, only 31% of the respondents said that they can or do speak Irish. And within that, only 1.8 said they speak it daily outside of school. Only 2.6 said they speak it weekly outside of school. And in the Gaeltachts, 68% can speak Irish and 24% use it daily outside of school, which is pretty on par with what the government strategy wanted by 2030. So that is a success story. But of course, that is in the Gaeltachts, where Irish is very much seen as the majority language. And these numbers are up from the 2006 census, and there should be another census soon. Irish is still considered an endangered language by UNESCO. And an interesting fact is that the Bank of Ireland, the National Bank, took Irish out of all of its ATMs across the country this year. They released a statement because that caused some backlash. And the statement said that 99% of their users had never chosen the Irish language. Irish is an official language of the EU, but it will become a working language by 2022. And that just means it will be used in official EU business, official EU documents, and the European Union estimates that about 200 full-time translators jobs for Irish will be needed by 2022. So this may help increase the status of the language across the continent, which may help increase Irish speakers and maybe non-Irish speakers' desire to speak it. And here we have included a couple questions that we asked Dr. Ruth Harmon, who is a professor in our department. If you have not taken a class with Dr. Harmon, I highly recommend it. But she was born in Dublin. She's a native Irish speaker. And you can pause this and read her answers. But the gist is that they echo the theme that we've seen from all of our research and all of the videos, that Irish is still, for most of the generation, seen as an obligatory school subject and was never seen as a living language for the outside world. If you remember the first video that played, the older gentleman said that there was still a stigma that his generation felt of shame about speaking Irish. It was not seen as the acceptable societal language to speak. And so despite being a native Irish speaker, Dr. Harmon says that she is no longer fluent in Irish, which is sadly typical of most Irish of the older generations. And so the question is there still hope moving forward for the revitalization of the Irish language? Let's first listen to a shopkeeper talk about her thoughts.
Everybody from the island has Irish, and even people who move here from other countries attempt to learn a certain amount of Irish. Some do a good job, but some don't, but at least they try. What I have noticed in the past few years, actually, is a lot more Irish people who come to the island trying out their bit of Irish that they'll learn at school and wanting to learn Irish, more so than years ago. So maybe we're getting more proud of our heritage and our language, hopefully.
So the answer to that question is yes, there is hope for Irish, and it comes from several different places. Two are still the government strategies and the schools. The huge strategy does talk about investing more in teacher education and curriculum to revamp the way Irish is taught in schools. But some people wonder if this huge multifaceted strategy will really trickle down into making a difference in people's lives. And so a big movement currently is to focus on bottom-up attempts at planning, with everyone being seen as a language planner. Teachers are not the only hope for revival, as how one article put it. So the idea is to move the language from only the schools to the streets, so to speak, and to make it culturally relevant for younger generations. Because if there's no way, no reason for them to speak it outside of school, then the language is never going to progress. One group in Dublin I found in an article have started what they call pop-up Gaeltachts, because as you saw, most of the Gaeltachts are on the western side of Ireland. And so they have these events where they meet once a month, meetups in local pubs where participants only speak Irish with each other for a couple hours. And these are very successful. They have about 200 people that attend them. And in a wonderful article that I found by Marianne Moriarty, she talks of the translanguaging, like we learned about in the Garcia readings, that she witnessed in a primary school where the boundaries for English and Irish were relaxed and children were asked to create a rap in Irish. The result was a more positive orientation towards Irish from the children and more children wanting to use it. On helping revitalize Irish, Moriarty writes, "There is a need for the educational system to become both an ideological and an implementational space where flexible bilingualism is supported via language practices that constitute translanguaging. A more flexible approach, which builds on students' real experiences of Irish, can only stand to be of benefit to the continued maintenance of the language." So the real crux of the matter is that for Irish to be revitalized and continue to be revitalized, it cannot be only seen as something that's in school. And there's a lot of work being done from the government, from regional governments, and from the community to make this happen. And of course, there will be challenges moving forward, especially with Ireland experiencing a major uptick in immigration that came from EU membership. So from 1980 to 2008, their foreign-born population went from 1% to 12%, and they now have a lot of international commerce. I believe Google has their European headquarters is in Dublin. So now one of the biggest tricks will be balancing this heritage language with a modern, globalized nation, which is a uniquely 21st century problem. And I'm going to end with this quote by Leo Varadkar, the Irish Taoiseach, or the Prime Minister, who actually is of Indian descent. He's the first non-white Prime Minister they have ever had. And he said that even though Ireland is a small island on the edge of Europe, the Irish see it as an island at the center of the world. And that's pretty indicative of how they view their culture and their heritage and their language as well.
It'll never be what the Constitution says it should be. Never, ever. It'll never come back as the first language of the state. If we can become proud of it, rather than resentful of it, proud of it and say, no, we're not going to let it go, because if we do, we're letting go part of what we are. If you could get that across to people, then it'll survive, and be sure of surviving. Because the day we let Irish go, then we're in trouble.
So thank you guys very much for watching our presentation. That is it for us. I want to make one note to everyone should go watch this video in its entirety. It can be found on YouTube. It's called To Have Irish. As you can see, it's also in a link in our references. It's a beautiful video. So thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed it. We really enjoyed making this.
Jida Krishna Kari, Jida Krishna Kari.